Well, hey, welcome everybody in for chapter 8 of our study of how the Bible actually works. It's a text by Dr. Peter Enns, and this is Bible study because we generally read the Bible. Also, it's important to us. So there are kind of two textbooks for the work we've been doing. Now, having said that, I will say that this week is kind of an exception. It's a little bit different. And you will notice that in chapter 8, Dr. Enns has titled this chapter Interlude Jesus and All That. We're in the midst of considering how the Bible talks about God, how it was written by people who were seeking to understand God in their time and in their place. And when you come to the time when Jesus uh, it enters the scene, when Jesus is born, Jesus' ministry, eventually his suffering, his passion, his death, and resurrection, that is a very special, what should I say, sort of a special section of applying these ideas. We're going to think today about how significantly the followers of Jesus had to uh, reimagine God in some new ways. And so we're not reading as much scripture today because we are sort of taking a pause and positioning everything we've learned so far and preparing for what we're going to be learning the rest of the way. So just wanted to be clear about that today. So let's jump right into the session then. It sounds a little startling, but Dr. Enns opens this chapter by saying this. This is the very first line. The Bible does not leave us with one consistent portrait of God, but a collection of ancient and diverse portraits of how the various biblical writers understood God for their times. And as you know, if you've been along these last few weeks, that's a real key. These are people seeking to use their words to uh, demonstrate their understanding of how God is present with them, what God is like, etc. So listen to that one more time. And I just want to ask you to pause. What's your reaction when you hear this? The Bible does not leave us with one consistent portrait of God, but a collection of ancient and diverse portraits of how the various biblical writers understood God for their times. Now, Dr. Enns moves ahead in trying to illustrate that and says, God is imagined in Scripture as a king, a rock, a shepherd, a fortress, a vine, a potter, and there are many, many others, but those are some of the images that he raises. And I would add one of my all time favorites used by Jesus is the term Abba, which is a word in Aramaic, the language that Jesus most likely spoke, how Jesus most likely prayed. Aramaic is kin to the Hebrew, which was how the Old Testament was written, and Arabic, which is the language that's spoken in all of the other nations surrounding Israel. Kind of put those together and you get Aramaic. This word Abba in Aramaic means father sometimes, and it also has what's known as a dual form, which means mother and father. You just speak it, and the term connotes that relationship. Father, mother and father, my parents who know me, who love me, who care for me. Now, all of these terms are based on the culture of the time. Whoever's writing, whoever's speaking, are using ideas that they uh, could bring a something tangible, something they could understand, and they could bring that as a way of understanding something about God. In the 18th century, God was often seen, for example, as a divine watchmaker, someone who took great care to assemble all the inner workings of the watch, and uses those tiny tools and gets everything set just precisely, winds that watch, and then sets it on its way. That made sense to people in that age. Dr. Enns has an interesting thought when he says, now generations of smartphone and smartwatch users will have to come up with their own analogy. I'm not quite ready to try to describe God as my cell phone, although this is certainly very important to me and I use it to communicate a lot. So who knows? Maybe before it's all said and done, I'll be able to describe something about God. Who we are and when and where we exist affect how we imagine God. The ancient Israelites saw Yahweh's love as his steadfast commitment to them. And that's why they spoke and said that God's love is like a good king committed to the welfare of his people. It's why we have so much of the language in books of Samuel and Kings and Chronicles, for example, that described the good things in the rule of the good kings of Israel and pointed out some of the bad things that some of the kings did to say, well, this is not like God. God would never do this thing that the bad or unfaithful king did. They used language uh, uh, that they could relate to. We don't get the king language quite as much today. A very vital point in this chapter is that Christians imagine God's love most supremely in the self-sacrifice of Jesus' death on the cross. As I'm recording this, we're well into the season of Lent, and we are remembering how Christ walked that road and was on that path which was going to lead him to suffering, to death, and, of course, to resurrection. But it's unlikely that the ancient Israelites would have considered such a shameful death as an act of God's love. It just wasn't seen that way. In fact, practically no one in the culture of that time would have identified with someone being crucified on a cross as an act of love or actually of any meaning. The Jewish culture, the Roman culture, the Greek culture, all of those cultures understood crucifixion as something reserved for the lowest of the low, particularly the Romans. You could not crucify a Roman citizen. It was against the law because citizens had standing. They were somebody. But these criminals and people who are parts of other nations, they're not anybody. Let's just crucify them and get them out of the way. So you can see what a strong act of imagination it was for those first believers to say, this was God. This is God's love for us. This horrible, shameful death actually means something good. On page 155, Dr. Enns makes two very powerful statements that I think we need to consider. The first is that Jesus' crucifixion represents a major reimagining of God. They had to really work to try to understand how God could be involved with a crucifixion. The second idea is that the same thing is true for resurrection. Child sacrifice, God's beloved Son being killed on the cross, and people rising up from the dead were things that just weren't to be done, did not happen. These are things that we often take for granted in the story. And yet, They are prime examples of the ways that God had to be reimagined. The Old Testament, the Hebrew scripture by and large, does not have a conception of resurrection, of life after death. It talks a lot about the place of the grave and where people go when they're buried, but there's not a real understanding of rising from the dead. So that's a shocker on Easter. We sing it, we celebrate it, we believe in it, but it took a lot of reimagination to understand God working in that way. Dr. Enns' argument is that this is what had to happen, and in fact did happen, all the way through the Bible's narrative. People are always having to reimagine God working in a new and different way for a new and different time. And he says, evidently, God is just fine with that. There are 4 questions that Dr. Enns says we should consider and that we should continue to ask today. These are questions that drive the way the Bible was written and how people were trying to understand God. The first question is, what is our hope? Where in our understanding of God do we find hope? The second question is, how do we yearn for God to show up here and now? The third question, what urgent thing is happening right now to us, our families, and our world? And the fourth question is, what new thing will the God of old do now? Again, those are all written in the text, and if you haven't already, you can go back to those. And I encourage us all to spend a little time thinking about that. The way and the time and the place that people lived had a very large effect on how they understood God and how they wrote about God. And we have to think about God in the same ways. What's going on in our world? Where are the places that we need help and that we need hope? And how do we talk about God showing up in those places? On page 159, this statement is made. The process of reimagining God is not a problem to be overcome, but an invitation to meet the always active, always present God here and now, where we are, and to trust that God is with us in that process. Whew, that's a lot to think about. It's a lot to say. God, the creator of the world, is being reimagined all the time and can be reimagined through the lens of any culture, of any time, and any place. Perhaps this is at least one reason why the Christian faith has had such staying power and has spread broad and wide. Different people living in different times and places can connect with this God in ways that engage their world and make sense to them. Now, again, we've already read some passages, and we will continue to read places in the Bible where we see that the people who lived in Bible times were having to do this. The church almost immediately had to begin to talk about Jesus in new ways, in ways that made sense to cultures that were different than that first century Jewish culture there in Israel, there gathered around Jerusalem. We know that the word about Jesus spreads farther and farther and farther, and every time was reimagined, was retold for that new culture. So, one of the things we did in class was to spend a little time talking about how we might imagine God for our time and our place. How do you speak about God in the experience of your life? And then we thought about some other specific examples. How do Israeli citizens imagine God for their need? What about the people of Gaza and Palestine? How can they imagine God in their culture? How do scared and abused women and children imagine God? Think about God being where they are. What about those who find themselves on the fringes of our society due to sexual orientation or gender identity, economic inequality, or racial prejudice, which does still exist? What about the people who honestly cannot fathom the mindset of the other political party, whichever that may be? How in the world can those people think like that? How do they speak of God in their culture? I think and I hope you get the idea. And this is all in support of that opening statement. There's not just one unified, simple, consistent portrayal of God, even in the pages of the Bible. God is a strong helper, a warrior in warrior cultures. God is a parent who actually cradles and dandles God's child on his or her knee in a culture where abandoned and suffering children are needed. God is the loving and patient Father who sends his only Son into a world that does not understand him, does not recognize him, and ultimately puts him to death. These are all ways that the Bible speaks about God. So we are continuing to join that project. And I hope that you will begin to think and to put into words, into your thoughts, how God is present in your world, how God shows up. And I think how we can pray to God with the needs of our time. Next time, we're going to read chapter 9, which has an intriguing title, Seriously Updating the Ancient Faith. I'll look forward to seeing you then. God bless.